Welcome to Dog People, a podcast about the Japanese punk bands Going Steady and Ging Nang Boyz. I'm Bob Vielma, and I'm here with my co-hosts Mike Huguenot and Adam Passion. What's going on, homies?
Nothing.
Silence.
That silence is appropriate.
But yeah, so I want to, kind of take the reins a little bit on this one and talk about Beach, because as far as I've been able to tell, I'm the only person who likes this record. So I feel like it's a really important one for the band, though. I think it's one that is kind of a pivotal moment for the band. And I am really curious to pick your guys' brains a little bit about it and bounce some thoughts off you and see what you think, kind of based on some of the thoughts that I've been thinking about regarding the record.
We're ready.
Okay, great. Let's jump into it. That is, not stump into it. Let's stump right into it.
I'm willing to stump into it if you want to.
Perfect.
I have my stump speech prepared.
Well, at stump number one, we have the title. And I'm curious, I want to go to you, Bob. What do you think of when you hear the word beach?
I think of a physical location. Yeah, you just think of cool breeze, kind of that feeling of the sand underneath your feet. I kind of imagine Northern California beaches, real cloudy and cool all the time. That's kind of the beach I think of.
Yeah. How about you, Adam? What comes to mind when just with the word beach?
Yeah, same kind of thing, but more than the place, it's kind of a feeling, especially like a feeling like you only really go to the beach with people that you care about or want to be with. So like a family kind of friendly kind of vibe is what I think of, like a beach party or a picnic on the beach with your family or something.
Yeah, I think both of those make total sense to me and are kind of what I think of right away when I think of the beach too. But I think that there is like another sense of the beach, and I think that this is kind of what is being hinted at here a little bit. And I want to talk about a couple particular examples of the beach in Japanese media, like famous examples of it, starting with The Woman in the Dunes, the 1964 movie. Bob, I know you mentioned this once to me in the past. I think when you were living in Japan, you visited Totori Sand Dunes, where the movie was filmed. Is that right?
You know, I never actually went there. I went to the second biggest sand dune in Japan, which is in this town called Hamamatsu.
Okay.
But yeah, everyone I knew in Japan was like, yo, Totori, that's like the legit Japanese desert. And then like when I found out it was just sand dunes and not a desert, I was like, really? Come on, guys. Like I've seen real desert. I've been to Arizona. Like, so yeah, it was just kind of a funny experience for me hearing that.
Have you been there, Adam?
Yeah, I have been there, and same thing that Bob said. It's something that people here say it's kind of like a little desert, but when you get there, not only is it just sand dunes, but it's only like 1 or 2 sand dunes. So it's not even as big as like Paso Robles or something like that. It's nothing really. They do have camels there that you can ride, and they kind of beef it up as this like Arabian paradise kind of thing, but it's not. Yeah, it's really not much to write home about, but it was fun.
That's interesting. I didn't realize there was any sort of fake Arabian element to it at all.
If there's any like analog to Lake Havasu or something like that in Japan, it's Totori though. Like that's where like Spring Break '97 is for them.
Gotcha. Well, I bring up Woman in the Dunes because it was filmed right on the beach there, using the sand dunes there to create the effect of this location from the book by Kobo Abe, Woman in the Dunes. And the book was kind of a really influential postmodernist book. It was kind of an antecedent, or an antecedent, yeah, right? The one that comes before to Paul Auster in America. And I think as well, shows like True Detective too, I think kind of pay a spiritual homage to Kobo Abe a little bit. But the story is about an entomologist who is going to like find bugs in the desert and accidentally falls into this kind of home that is within a sand dune, within a sand pit, essentially. And this woman lives in there, and most of her life is spent sweeping away the sand. Her home is perpetually sinking into the dune, and she has to spend most of her waking hours just sweeping away the sand to survive. And it essentially becomes the story about desire and death and this liminal space, the space where you're kind of perpetually on the edge of both of those things. And I think for Mineta in particular, that's something that he has drawn out a lot in his music. Those two elements, death and desire, are really central to all of the Ging Nang Boyz music, I think. Women in the Dunes was also really well received. It won the Special Grand Jury Prize at Cannes the year it came out, which was kind of a secondary award. It was nominated for Best Director at the Academy Awards and also for Best Foreign Language Film. And Andrei Tarkovsky, the Russian director, has said it's one of his top 10 favorite films of all time. So it was a pretty influential one. But again, I think the sense of the way it uses the beach is to evoke a place of eternal waiting, almost. The story is often compared to Sisyphus, for example. The second one I want to bring up is the movie Hanabi, which I don't know if either of you guys have seen. I feel like maybe both of you have.
That's the movie by Beat Takeshi.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's the one where he has an ailing wife. Am I right about that?
Yeah, that's right. He plays like an ex-cop, and he's sort of fallen into debt with the Yakuza, and his wife has leukemia, and he's trying to get money to pay for her care, essentially. And this is a movie that is really all about meditating on death. Almost everybody in it is at a point where they're just about to die or has died already. A major part of the movie is that there was a shooting that goes wrong, and one of Beat Takeshi, his character is named Nishi, one of Nishi's partners dies, another one is put in a wheelchair, and he's kind of dealing with the consequences of that. But in almost every shot in the movie, you can see the beach in the background, nearly constantly throughout the movie. They're constantly driving along beachside highways, constantly seeing it kind of looming in the distance at all times. And really importantly, the movie kind of culminates in this confrontation at the beach. It sort of serves as this kind of the end, in a way, a place that Nishi kind of has to reach and kind of can't go past, in a way. Mm-hmm. And the third example that I want to bring up is a really recent game called Death Stranding. Adam, I'm curious how big that is in Japan. Have you heard about that much?
I don't know Death Stranding, no.
It came out in 2019, end of 2019, and it's by Hideo Kojima, who did the Metal Gear Solid games.
Right.
It's the first game in the Kojima Productions production company.
Starring Norman Reedus.
Right. Yeah, exactly. From Walking Dead and one weird German horror movie where he has like no lines and just shows up briefly. But so this game is a post-apocalyptic world, but in a really weird way. It's not like there's been like a nuclear blast or something, but it's more like the world of the dead and the world of the living are kind of collapsing upon each other. And there's a lot of consequences from that. But one of the main concepts of the game is that the thing that connects the world of the living and the world of the dead is the beach. And the idea is that every single person has their own beach that when they die, they go to, and they have their own associations. There's a character in the game named Heartman, who's played by Nicholas Winding Refn, the director who did the Pusher series and Drive and a couple others. But there's a quote he has where he says, "The beach is arguably both a concept and a reality. A discrete beach is influenced by the mind of the individual and therefore linked to them irrevocably." And it's the idea that when someone passes from the world of the living to the world of the dead, they pass through their own beach. So all of this is kind of to bring about this idea of a beach not as a place you go to with your family or a place you go to like chill and get some rays, but the beach is like a threshold, a beach as a sort of liminal space, and the beach is the sort of end of terrestrial existence, in a sense. So that's my kind of thought on the record initially. That my initial thought on what I think they may be kind of driving at a little bit with the name, or what I think may come about through the name, even if they didn't mean to.
Mike, listening to you present your ideas just now, I definitely chose the right episode to be stoned for. So that's all I have to add for now, but keep it going.
Classic Bob.
Hoping to blow your mind, Bob, as we go. So let's talk about this record, though, because this is the first and only Ging Nang Boyz live record, and it's also the first and only Ging Nang Boyz remix record. Mm-hmm. I bring up this idea of it being kind of a threshold, a beach being a threshold, or like the end, also because this album came out technically at the same time as Hikari no Nakani, but if you look at the record numbers, Hikari no Nakani is School Kill 26, and Beach is School Kill 27. So technically, this comes out afterwards, and is the last record that the full band did before the band essentially dissolved and went back to just being Mineta.
Mm-hmm. And if I could add real quick, this is the only record that pictures them on the cover.
Very good point.
That's true.
Yeah.
You know what? Not only does it pictures them on the cover, but it looks just like it's sort of just a photograph placed there on a background, like on a white, page. So it almost just looks like you're looking at old photos. It's not like it's certainly not like a promo image. It's just like, it looks like a home shot photo.
The one thing I wanted to point out about the cover photos, we can't expand this out to a full episode, but low-key, the Ging Nang Boyz have always been fashion icons. And this is definitely a baggy phase of their dress here.
Important point for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mike, before we get into like the actual music and all of that, the themes and things like that, just to your point about the title itself and that idea of transition, the word beach, like people in Japan, everybody understands the word beach. And I think it's important that this is called beach. It isn't called like the Japanese word for beach. And in Japanese, there's actually multiple words for beaches. I mean, like you can say sunahama, you can say kaisui yokujo, you can say umibe or whatever. And they're all different kind of focusing on different aspects of what a beach is. So one is maybe equivalent to like shore, and one might be equivalent to seaside, and one might be equivalent to like a sandy beach or something like that. And each word kind of is a little bit different. But in this one, they didn't choose any of those Japanese words. They chose the word beach, which makes it even more, to me, it makes it more ambiguous. Like it could be anything. It could be that happy kind of thing. But if you look at the photo, they're just kind of standing there. It's not a beach in the daytime. It's a beach at nighttime.
Right.
I hadn't thought about that idea, but it does show that kind of transition, like you're talking about between, I don't know, life and death, or, desire and, I don't know, stoicism, or whatever the opposite of desire is. But yeah, I think that I hadn't thought of that point before, but it is interesting that they chose the word beach, which is more ambiguous than what the Japanese equivalent would have been. And it also makes me kind of think about that, the Murakami Haruki book, Umibe no Kafka, which is Kafka on the shore. It's translated as that in English, but Umibe just means near the sea. So it's more like the word seaside. But in that book as well, there's no pleasant beach images whatsoever. There's, it also is kind of like everything in Murakami's work. It's kind of a portal to another world. So,
and it's funny you mentioned that too, because I think that in a strange way, Kafka is kind of like a recurring figure in a lot of these. Kafka was really influential to Kobo Abe, and Kafka is also mentioned oddly, specifically in Death Stranding, as an influence for one of the, not a character, there's an element called an Odra deck in the game, which is a reference to the Kafka short story, The Country Doctor, I believe. I think that's the one.
Okay.
But again, this, not normally the association you think of when you think of the beach. Is Kafka, for sure.
No, but I can see the appeal of Kafka to Japanese people or Japanese society, you know, that idea of the human spirit kind of fighting against this cold and, you know, unfeeling system and things like that. So, and that's something that is kind of a through line through all of the things that you're talking about. I mean, you know, even in the movie Hanabi and stuff, there's just this cold system that is in place, you know, disease and corruption and crime and all this kind of stuff, and the human spirit kind of traveling through that zone, and how each person experiences these different kind of cold and uncaring systems, which is yeah, it's really interesting.
And actually, one thing I wanted to say about Hanabi that I didn't get to mention at first is that I think that is a movie with a lot of life in it. It's actually a pretty fun at times movie for how dire the subject matter is, and it's really visually striking and has a lot of forward motion to it, even though it is really constantly meditating on death, it seems like.
Yeah, there's a lot of pathos there for sure. And even the final scene, which I guess we won't spoil it, but even the final scene I think is an act of love. And
definitely
a very human choice that they end up making. So,
Well, let's talk about the record a little bit. I think one thing that I really want to make a point about is that let's take a step back. So there was Going Steady, and you have Going Steady on record, which was a band that was really exciting, I think, but contained by the recorded process. I think, like, you listen to Boys and Girls, and there's a lot of energy, but it sounds pretty squashed down on record. And you compare that to Going Steady live, like, for example, the final show and the videos for, like, Wakamonotachi and stuff, and their shows are just absolutely insane live. A totally different thing from the record.
Yeah.
And I think from there you get to the Ging Nang Boyz. And you get to the Ging Nang Boyz on record, which is almost a way of incorporating the live elements of Going Steady into the recording sound. I think, like, the Ging Nang Boyz albums have a lot more live sound than the Going Steady albums do. They sound really explosive and dangerous, and like you're in the middle of this thing that's happening, kind of. And then you go from the sound of Ging Nang Boyz on record to trying to capture the live sound of the Ging Nang Boyz. And I think that you can only get to something like Beach. I think the only way you can really accurately try and continually raise that bar the way I think that they did is to do something that is sort of like the absolute limit, like Beach is. I think this record really is kind of them pushing themselves about as far as they can bring the sound without it totally just completely breaking under the weight of everything that's going on. The record starts out with pretty much right away with white noise and kind of almost sounds like waves rolling in or like tuning into a signal really harshly. Kind of like the newest record. I think that the newest record is probably hearkening back to Beach by opening that way.
Yeah.
There's that first track, Hajimari, which is kind of like an introduction. It's like a sound collage almost. And it sounds a lot like waves or like radio signals kind of washing in. And then around the 1 minute mark, you have the sound of an audience. And it kind of reveals that it's something that was probably played live in front of people. And they were probably walking out at that time, or the house lights came up or something. And then there starts to be these, they start building. There's these synths, kind of chill wavy synths, and like V drums. And then they really start to cheer around 2:20. And there's this seraphic choir that comes in. And then just this insanely loud guitar comes in after that. And then they go into Junan Nasai, which is the first song on Door. And so this is the second track on Beach now, the first live song of the record. And Junan Nasai on the record, it's so overblown. It's really hard to understand what is happening in it. I think when I listen to that record, I feel like the transition from the sound collage piece to Junan Nasai is like they're almost indistinguishable at a point. Even though like the drums kick in, it's just more noise almost at first, rather than like a harsh song, like a song beginning. How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. Like a lot of the times, even on the earlier Ging Nang Boyz records, something usually starts off sloppy or kind of noisy, and then it comes together at some point. And once the band kicks in, you're waiting, like the whole time you're waiting for the band to come in and to put it into like a kind of linear sort of song kind of thing. And this one, it doesn't. Like you said, there's no life preserver thrown out to you to like get you back into the music. It's just sort of, you start sinking even deeper.
Yeah, I feel like when they actually go into the music, it's not like it all snaps into focus. It's like you said, you're almost like going into it. Then there's no life preserver. You're kind of dissolved into the music at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I think, especially when we talked about the new album, Ne Minna Daisuki da yo, we were talking about how it starts out with that harsh feedback and it has 2 hardcore songs at the beginning, so it's pushing your buttons from the beginning, very much in the same way that Door and Kimi to Boku did. But this one is by far the harshest beginning. And not to get too far ahead of myself, but I'll admit, today's the first time I listened to the album in one sitting all the way through. And I think this is kind of a fake out intro. I think the album's a very different beast by the end of it. But it's for sure making it hard for people to get to the end of it, just by how intensely it starts.
Agreed. I think one thing they've always done is kind of kick the door open and make you acknowledge what they're doing at the beginning of every record. And they certainly did that this time.
It's like kicking down the door of a wasp's house and they're watching Ted Koppel and you're like, plow! Remember?
I remember your brother giving that advice.
That's what the Ging Nang Boyz do to those wasps.
Yeah, that Ted Koppel detail is what makes that quote.
So from Junanasai, they go into both Skool Kill and Nippon Hakkyou. So they're basically playing Door, the first 3 songs on Door, right off the bat. And Skool Kill is, I think, the first song on the record where you can hear anything that sounds like music. There's some sort of recognizable chord changes in it. You can actually hear most of the lyrics that Mineta is singing in it. And then they go into Nippon Hakkyou, which is just like they fulfill the name very well on this version of it. It's
For sure.
It's like fuzzes and screams. The remix effect starts kicking in on the bridge, and then it kind of like dissolves into this like industrial noise collage by the end of it.
I think Skool Kill has the first little hint of a remix. I think, don't they kind of like do almost like a record scratch type of noise in the middle of it where it kind of stops for half a second and then just keeps going?
I think you're right. I think that is a little bit earlier. And then I feel like they start really leaning into it a little bit on Nippon Hakkyou. They start playing the hand more. It's like you realize that it's not just a weird sounding live record, but also another element entirely, which is this remix record that they've decided to do as well.
For sure. This recording of Nippon Hakkyou and the beginning of Beach in general are really just brutal and harsh, but also my specific memory of Nippon Hakkyou and them playing it in our practice space is also very unhinged and wild. Like they had broken all of the instruments except for the drums halfway through that song. And it's kind of the recording and how grating it is really matches my visceral memory of seeing them perform that song.
Yeah, I think it's a really accurate capture of probably seeing that song live, even though it sounds totally maddening,
Yeah.
So after that one, they go into Wakamonotachi, which is really like one of Mineta's most beautiful and kind of transcendent songs. It's this ode to like the intoxicating power of youth. But on this version, it becomes like this 7-minute cloud of noise. Like it's almost indistinguishable what's happening in it. For a full 7 minutes, it's as though this thing is washing over you. And for the first time, when I was listening to this version and thinking about it, I started to wonder if Mineta ever wondered or like thinks about the fact that like historically obsession with youth is kind of like a fascistic thing, and like there's a lot of it's problematic, I think. And I wonder if this version of this is almost sometimes like an attempt to like undo in some way, or like cloud what he's done in some way. Like I'm trying to think of how to even put this.
I think Mineta's very self-aware, and I think he's always constantly going over his own art in his head and subverting it when he can. I think that's something we've touched upon a lot, but I think nothing is sacred to him in a way that's like always refreshing and kind of keeps you on your toes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like all of us are people who make art, and you know, there's that idea that like if you go back and change the things that you made when you were younger, that's the same as like destroying another person's art, right? Because that is a very different person who was making that art. And so that's kind of been something that I never want to revisit my old stuff and remake it just because I feel, even if I don't like it or I'm embarrassed of it at this point, I don't feel it's fair to the person who was making that at the time. But I feel like that's something that Mineta is quite happy to cross that line. And in fact, that's something he seeks out, is to go back and, you know, with a new lens, go in and cut up his old stuff. And what you're talking about here, Mike, I almost feel like he's taking it out to pasture. Like he's taking all these things that he created in his previous, you know, life, in his career as a younger person, and it's almost like he's just drowning them one by one or something, like, you know, to prepare for something new, to kind of clean the slate or something.
Yeah, I think in this one in particular, it's like the song has almost become like completely just like a wash of almost no color whatsoever, just like white noise kind of. And to take a song that is so melodic and so kind of emotionally loaded, and to turn it into something that is really like like a noise version of an ambient piece is definitely a subversion, to use your word, Bob. I think that was a good choice of words for sure.
You know, Mike, on the episode about Ne Minna Daisuki da yo, you were talking a lot about how Otona Zenmetsu kind of had that washed out Death Heaven vibe. And I think this recording of Wakamonotachi, especially during that bridge part where he's singing Bukoro shite kure ore no naka no bakemono, the microphone is just absolutely drenched in delay right there. And on any other recording of that song, that would be a chuggy, tough guy punk part. But here, you know, it might as well be My Bloody Valentine, especially the way they just drag out that part afterward, building up the tension. And when it finally comes in, when he's screaming Otento-sama, and the song's kind of about to kick back into gear, the release there, the catharsis there is just so huge. And it's one of those parts where it would probably be really indulgent and weird on a studio recording, but on a live recording, you know, it's pretty mind-blowing.
It's a big moment on the record, I think. And I think it's noticeable, too, that it's followed by overwhelming youth as well. Another kind of one of Mineta's like paeans to youth. And this one kind of like the song like almost explodes at a point. It feels like a lot of the remix elements or the kind of like behind the fourth wall kind of elements, the editing elements kind of take over around there.
You're talking about Kakenukete Seishun right afterward?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. then afterwards they go into Drifting Classroom, which is like way more dreamy, and it feels like a release almost, kind of, I think, at that point in the record.
The transition between Kakenukete Seishun and Drifting Classroom, Hyouryuu Kyoshitsu, I like how it gets all ethereal. You were kind of talking about how it introduced the really weird remix elements, and the way the transition goes, you can't tell, like, was that some studio trickery, or is that how they did it live? Like, how did they wash it out like that? It kind of just feels like it opens up when Hyouryuu Kyoshitsu starts. I thought that was a really cool transition right there.
Definitely.
So, guys, this has nothing to do with the actual transition that you guys are talking about, the musical transition, but when you mentioned Drifting Classroom, I realized that in our episode where we talked about manga and anime, I never even mentioned Drifting Classroom, that Umezukazuo horror manga. I don't know how that slipped past my mind.
I'm not even really familiar with that one.
Isn't that song also kind of about like death and transition?
Yeah, it might be. I don't know if you guys ever read that comic book. It's like really, I don't think it would be, I mean, it may have been released in English now, but when I read it, I thought, there's no way this would be, it has been? Okay. Yeah, when I read it, I thought, there's no way this would be able to be released in America with the school shooting and, you know, mass shooter violence kind of stuff going on. Because basically it's a, you know, story about a classroom that, like, they wake up in this other kind of realm where the teachers are all trying to kill them and the kids are killing each other, and it's a really, really violent book about little kids killing each other and teachers killing kids.
Hey, that's something that seems to run through a lot of Japanese media, huh? Battle Royale included.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, back to Beach.
Well, after that one, on Beach, they go into Baby Baby. And this is really, you know, I was talking about Wakamonotachi being one of Mineta's kind of like most transcendent songs, but I think this one probably is up there as well. And the version that they do is really, you know, again, like we've been talking about, they always kind of update their songs, and I feel like the version they do is a really good performance. There's this kind of dreamy, droney intro that they build on. And I was thinking when I was listening to this version of it, just how amazing it is that Mineta found this rhyme in Japanese to rhyme cream with supreme. It had never really dawned on me before, but just hearing it and finding that rhyme in another language, to me, it was dawning on me how much I appreciate Mineta's lyricism at times. I think he has a really sharp eye and can find these things that are there. I've never heard anyone else really pick that. I'm not sure I've heard that rhyme in English. I'm sure it has been done before, but having it found in another language and just slipped in so naturally is a great moment. Okay, I gotta hop in here and issue a quick correction, because I have been informed by my fiance that the rhyme cream in supreme is from the song Greased Lightning from the hit musical Grease. I think I saw Grease once. My mistake. Okay, let's get back to the episode.
You know, Mike, it's interesting you bring that up, because I don't think Japanese people, for the most part, understand the concept of rhyme. It's a kind of a foreign thing to them. And this is from my experience trying to teach rhyme in high school to Japanese high school students, and even my co-teachers, just like, oh, how do I explain rhyme to these kids? And so in Baby Baby, Mineta's rhyming everything. Everything ends on, you know, creamu, supremu, yureru. Everything ends on the u, and then on the next stanza after that, it's yume no naka de boku ra, te o tsunai de tondeta, mega samete boku wa naita. Everything ends on the ah. He's rhyming everything. I never thought of this before, but that's like some real songwriter shit right there.
Yeah. I will agree that rhyme is something that isn't it's a really hard concept for people to understand, especially rhyming in English, where the pronunciation of English words and pronunciation of, I mean, how they're pronounced in Japanese is so different and stuff. And so, yeah, I agree. It's an extra challenge for a language that doesn't typically have any kind of concept of rhyme.
Great lyric, too.
If I could backtrack real quick, in Hyouryuu Kyoshitsu, I really took note of Chin's solo, his guitar solo. It's different than what's on record. And it's one of the times on the record where I really felt how, kind of what we talked to him about, how him, Abiko, and Murai would all practice just like a full-time job. You can hear how locked in they are together. It sounds so loose and so tight at the same time. It's like super soulful. It's a super soulful moment hearing him play a different solo, and it just sounds so good.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that, Bob, because I think it's easy to just kind of dismiss this album out of hand and not realize that there are some moments that are actually really sonically pleasant. Like, even though a lot of it is really harsh, there are some parts that sound good and make you feel good. So,
and they're such a good band, honestly, at this point that they're playing, even though a lot of it is buried under the sounds and the feedback and everything, the performances are really strong. It's just, they're kind of hidden a little bit.
Yeah.
Hidden or obvious, like deliberately kind of obscured, and
yeah, definitely. So after Baby Baby, then they get into French Kiss.
Berochuu?
What's it called?
Berochuu.
Berochuu. Okay, but yeah, like French Kiss. So I guess it's a song from Boys on the Run. I didn't really remember this one.
It was the B-side.
Yeah, it was the B-side of Boys on the Run. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, and yeah, it's a really like transitional moment. It feels like it's kind of the one. There's this one, and then there's later on Tokyo Shikoku, and then they end kind of with one that I think is maybe a new song or a new version of an old song.
Yeah, it's a Going Steady song. It's a new version of Ahondara Koshinkyoku.
Yeah, is it totally... I mean, it sounds different, though. It sounds like they've rearranged it a bit as well.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite Going Steady songs back in the days, because it's one that was like one of the first or second tracks, I think, or first track, I think, on Sakura no Uta.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one that I always thought was an underrated track because it has that intensity to it.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to that one. I bring it up because I feel like that Tokyo Shikoku and French Kiss are like the only ones that kind of hint at like new stuff or something beyond kind of Door and Kimito Boku no. Obviously, though, that is kind of complicated by the fact that the band more or less stopped being a band after this record. So they kind of like are these hints at like the last sounds of the original Ging Nang Boyz, kind of. And stuffed in there is this version of Ningen, bizarre version of Ningen, that suddenly breaks apart the entire idea of it being a live record. And so at the end of French Kiss, it's this acoustic and sincere song, and then suddenly at the end, they just chop it really suddenly, and there's 7 seconds of silence at the end of the track, where there's no audience, there's no band playing or anything. It just suddenly cuts off abruptly, and then they go into Ningen, a version quite a lot like that first Ging Nang Boyz song, where it's just Mineta.
I had the same thought. It was like, oh, they're back at square one.
Yes, exactly. It starts out with this insanely jarring harmonica, and then Mineta unaccompanied, again sounding like he is in a room just losing it. And it really feels like, it's a deliberate hearkening back to the first moment of this band.
君が泣いてる夢を見たよ君が泣いてる夢を見たよ僕は何にもしてあげられず
Kind of the arrhythmic delivery of the vocals too. It was kind of like confrontational in a way. It sounds like he's singing at the crowd in kind of an intense way.
Interesting.
To me, the beginning of the song almost sounds like it's not even in a live setting at all. It sounds like they got him in a room. And I don't know if this is true or not, but it sounds like it's recorded separately from the live show. It sounds like it's him recording it by himself screaming at nobody, and then spliced into a live version. But I don't know if that's true or not.
That's kind of what I liked about that when we're talking about that very first song they ever released. Like in that one, what was so jarring about it to me is that there isn't anything else. It's literally just him in a room yelling arrhythmically and stuff like that, and it made it seem like, I don't know, it had this kind of isolation kind of feel to it, like isolated feel, that it's, I don't know, like a person trapped in a room and just kind of going crazy. And that's kind of what this one captures as well.
Perfectly.
涙の後にはただ笑いがあるはずさただ誰かが言ってた
Yeah, and then they come right back. They join him, partway through. The band comes back, and suddenly it feels like it's a live record again. And it even ends with audience applause. So it sounds like they've kind of like returned to the idea of this being a live album by the end of the song, kind of. But there's this, the end of French Kiss and the beginning of Ningen is this really weird moment where it's almost like breaking the fourth wall a little bit, and becoming much more a record than a live record. And I think that this record really does actively try to blur that line between being an album and being a live album.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier, that idea that, they're trying to capture something that's not capturable, which is they're trying to capture that feeling of a live performance. And even if they have to add to it, and not just rely on the performance itself, they're trying to capture that spirit of it and the energy of it, rather than the actual form of that. And it's something that's very different from live albums. I typically don't like live albums because it's basically the performance is generally the same as it is in a recording, but you'd have extra noise to get through to appreciate it. So I usually don't like live versions. So I think what you're talking about there, like that idea of mixing in pre-recorded stuff, adding extra stuff and everything, yeah, they kind of get back on track of what this conceptually is supposed to be, right? Which is, I don't know, kind of a hodgepodge of different things.
Yeah.
If you look in the liner notes, I'm going to pull them out just to make sure I'm not getting this wrong. But they've recorded this over the course of it's different portions of like 4 different shows sequenced together somehow. And the shows are pretty far spread out. There's 2 from 2008 and 2 from 2011.
Interesting.
Also, I had this thought, right? This is a very kind of personal to me, but I moved to, when I lived in Japan, I lived from the summer of 2008 to the summer of 2009 out there. And I was like, hey, man, maybe I'll get to catch some Ging Nang Boyz shows while I'm out there. That'll be sick. And I remember Adam, I think, went to one like a year before that in Nagoya and was telling me about it. I was like, oh, dude, I'd love to see that. And pretty much they stopped playing shows in 2008 and then didn't play again until these shows in 2011. I think they did a tour after the big Japanese earthquake. But also, that tour, I think, may have been their last tour, aside from a couple one-off shows. Like, they kind of weren't a live band anymore at this point. It's like you're capturing kind of like the dying gasp of that original lineup in this recording. It's kind of crazy to think about. They went so hard from the beginning when they started. For like 3 or 4 years, they just played nonstop, and then these shows that they capture in 2008 and 2011, it's kind of when like, hey guys, we're gonna make an album for the next 9 years. We're not gonna play much anymore. Like,
yeah,
that's kind of the vibe.
Definitely. Do you guys know much about the song before the last song, Tokyo Shikoku? I'm not really familiar with that one.
It's just a remix of the song Tokyo from the end of I think that's Kimi to Boku off the top of my head. It's one of the ending songs on that record.
It is a new version of it. Okay, I didn't realize.
And I'm pretty sure this song came out on this cassette-only release they did called La Strada, where they like released a couple different versions of older songs. But also, holy moly, I really like this song, and I think it made me kind of rethink. Like, obviously, like the Ne Minna Daisuki Da Yo stuff, I really liked all the synth pop stuff on there, but it kind of made me start rethinking like that song Boku Tachi wa Sekai o Kaeru koto ga dekinai. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
We can't change the world. It made me rethink that song, and I was just like, dude, they've been kind of dipping their toes into the New Order-y synth pop waters, and I like it more and more as I spend more time with it. And so hearing this version at the end of the record, almost at the end of the record of Tokyo, I was like, hey, this song is really cool.
I was always a big fan of the original version of that song. It's, one of those, it's a really heartfelt kind of sentimental idea, right? Like, and it's a very personal song, I think, because it's that story of like, two country bumpkins coming down to the big city from, way up in Tohoku area, like, and then real life is just too big for them, right? And it swallows their dreams and stuff. And then she ends up going home alone, I think, right? And he stays. And it's just, there's a very personal element to that, I think, from, a biographical element, sort of. I assume it's autobiographical.
It's a powerful song. It's great.
Yeah, and
both versions.
I agree with you, Bob. I think it's a really good version of the song as well, and a really, like you said, I think that they've been increasingly taking on elements of like kind of synthy post-punk kind of as part of their sound, and I think that this is a really good moment for that for them. And then the record kind of it does end with this new version of Ahondara from Sakura no Uta, and it starts out as though it's been being ripped like through a black hole or something. The sound at the beginning of this track is even more extreme than the beginning of the record. Somehow it's as though it has been pushed to the utter limit. Like it cannot possibly go any further. And then the song suddenly kind of like rips through that and is there. And it's kind of the final flaying of the ears on the record a little bit. And the record swells like a wave at the end, and then really abruptly it cuts off, it swallows up, and the record's over. And as dramatically as it, and as shockingly as it opens, it really suddenly ends, and it's gone. And it's the last thing that band, as a full band, did together.
I think this song in particular is really appropriate for that too, because the lyrics are, in this fucked up tomorrow, we don't know what's going to happen. And what's going to happen with this band? This is their last release together. Like, it's kind of a crazy choice. I don't know if it was a conscious choice with the band to be like they're working on this record and they're like, man, this is the last thing we're going to do together because we can't stand each other. Was that why they ended with this? I think this cover kind of worked in the way that I wished Otona Zenmetsu had worked on the new album. I feel like bringing it back as a live thing and just kind of making a statement with it live, kind of like Adam was talking about killing the old artist. I kind of feel like there's a difference between recording a new version that might overshadow the old version, or performing it live and just being like, this is something I did and I'm reinterpreting it through my current perspective. I really like how it works on this record in that case.
Yeah, I wonder myself the same thing what you're talking about, if they knew that this was going to be the end. I have a feeling that they did. I have a very good feeling that they did, but I don't have any reason to necessarily believe that.
Yeah.
Like any facts to believe that. But what I do like about Mineta revisiting these songs is that he is clearly trying to reinterpret them and show a new meaning of it. So in the original one, when they put that song out, it's called The March of Fools, right? And so it's kind of, you don't really know who the fools are. Is it the idea of like the adults who are putting on the suits and just going through their, through the daily grind? Or is it the young people who are foolish for being so hopeful and saying, I don't know what tomorrow's going to be, but I hope it's good and keep going forward? I don't know exactly, it's kind of ambiguous, but there's a kind of a cool, like a happy, positive message about it. And when you hear it in this case, that whole kind of chant that they do where they're saying, what will be here tomorrow? We don't know. What does tomorrow have in store for us? Now it's not about our generation or young people in general. It's about us almost, right? The band.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting take. And if it is conscious, then it's a stroke of genius, to be honest.
Right.
失いかけてた希望の光が
I was thinking of another thing too when I was listening to this song, which is that going back to Women in the Dunes, which I was talking about earlier, that story is often compared to the myth of Sisyphus, in that the woman is constantly having to. There's no end to her work. She can't possibly be finished sweeping away the sand because the sand that she sweeps away is immediately replaced by more sand.
That's what I thought when you said it. Yeah, I thought of that. I immediately thought of the myth of Sisyphus.
Yeah. And in a sense, there is a sort of Sisyphusian quality to Mineta as well. I feel like he is constantly pushing up the boulder, which is his own work, up the hill. He is constantly bound by his past, it seems like. It seems like he is carrying it with him always. He's never really leaving behind his previous work. He's always carrying it forward and pushing it up, and it never really reaches an end point. It feels like it's always, every song is in negotiation at all times, it seems like. It seems like his past is something that is constantly carried with him in the, his musical past, I mean, is constantly carried with him and never really unshouldered, I would say.
That's a really interesting concept. The idea that your art, that your creation, that your body of work is a burden that you have to deal with as an artist. I've never thought about that before, but that's a really cool concept.
I think Mineta very much is doing that and has been doing that and dealing with his own body of work and trying to negotiate what it means to have made something. You know, he's constantly reworking these things, and it seems as though there are always works in process and always just kind of glimpses into a current moment almost.
You know what this kind of reminds me of? It's a slightly less psycho version of what Kanye West was doing with The Life of Pablo, where over the course of weeks or months, he was constantly updating the same record and re-uploading a new version over the last one. Obviously, his one is a little just more like, probably that dude just needs to be on some pills to help settle himself down. But it's a cool idea to just kind of, as an artist, put it out in the open. Like, I think it's pretty rare for someone to constantly be doing this process so openly, saying, I'm going to change this, I'm going to do it over again. Specifically with Mineta, who has 3 versions of Ginkatetsu no Yoru, among other songs, a lot of other songs that have 2 versions. I mean, there's something kind of cool about it. Clearly, we're here talking about this band because they're cooler than other bands. So,
yeah, it's almost like a Proustian kind of thing. Like he's just kind of spending his whole life on this one set of things that he wants to expand. And I don't know, it's kind of cool.
I agree.
In its own way.
Dude, I think that's right on. I think there is a sort of almost Proustian quality to it. It's like he returns to his own songs as though they are memories in ways, it seems like. And the song
characters that he can play with,
Yeah, and the song itself becomes a memory in a way that is constantly being maybe misremembered or recolored in memory. And I think you're on the mark there for sure.
You know, you referred to the songs as characters in this story that he's telling, but I think the most notable character that's missing from this live album is Mineta himself. If you've seen him perform, he's giving 5-10 minute long monologues sometimes, and I noticed that was sorely missing from this record. Aside from him saying arigato a few times in the middle of songs, you don't get any of these like inspirational chants or like diatribes. Just like he gets into some crazy stuff, and I wondered why they omitted that from what is otherwise kind of a representative live record.
That's a good question. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. There's no like between song banter whatsoever, and it's not like it's banter normally with him. It's normally very much like a monologue, a long and impassioned monologue, and there's none of that on it. Yeah.
That could have to do with the fact that those are just kind of, extemporaneous, like they're not calculated like his music and stuff is. And I almost wonder if that's why they didn't put out a live album before that, was just because obviously they want to capture the energy, but they also want it to be a deliberate thing that doesn't rely on just impulse and the moment. So I almost wonder if they cut those things out because it's not as planned and careful. I have no idea, but that's just an idea.
Meh.
One thing though, going back, so you're talking about the lady on the dunes, and you're talking about some other things. Sorry, not the lady on the dunes. Is it the woman on the dunes?
Woman in the Dunes, yeah.
And these ideas, when I think about like literature, Japanese literature in particular, there isn't really any pleasant ideas of beaches. There's really the idea of the ocean being a overwhelmingly powerful force that is terrifying, and can easily, the uncontrollable is kind of the image of the ocean in general. It's definitely one of those things in Mishima's books as well, like The Sound of Waves and the sailor who fell out of grace with the sea and stuff like that. When you talk about beach being a transitional thing, what we all started off saying, that the beach is this place where you feel happy with your family and your friends and stuff, that's the sandy part of the beach. And when you cross that line and you go into the ocean part of the beach, it's a uncontrollable kind of wild scariness. And so when you're talking about this idea as well, the final track being the March of Fools, it's that march into the unknown. What happens next is the ocean part. What has come before is the beach part, is the sandy beach part. So that it does kind of present itself as this transitional kind of thing if you think about it thematically in that sense.
Right.
This cover photo in the dark, that's the unknown. They take the photo on the beach at night, and it's like beyond the beach, it's nothingness. Like, what is out there?
Right. I think it really is kind of the logical limit of what that band was reaching for. I feel like it's like they can't go any further with the sound in a way. They've pushed it about as far as it can possibly go, and into the waters we go.
Yeah.
We haven't really approached this topic much yet, but I'm wondering how much of this process drove the band to their edge, to their limit, into the unknown. Like, 3 members don't quit a band for no reason.
Yeah.
I think Chin hinted at the fact that this was really hard on Abiko. It's like, what was it like making this demented live record? I mean, I'm sure the other record was part of it too, but what was it like being in this band at that time?
I really want to know Abiko's thoughts on making this record. I'm really curious to hear what he was going for in particular. Like, I'm curious to just get some of his unguarded thoughts about putting the record together, and what that time in the band was like, because it sounds like it must have been a lot. There must have been a lot going on.
For sure.
Without assuming much, I just want to kind of, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but it did seem like at least the Chin and Abiko seemed somewhat broken by the process. So, and by the falling out, like it wasn't just like a thing where they, decided, okay, well, we're going to move on to something else. It seemed like they were both kind of broken because they didn't move on to other bands. They both went off to a completely different life. So, and the same thing goes for Murai. It seems like this whole thing, this album and the breakup that happened to coincide with it, it wasn't just a break with the music that they had made up until that point. It was a break with music entirely, which is something that I can't imagine, for all of us. So
it's crazy to imagine someone like Chin, who was in another band at the same time as the Ging Nang Boyz at the beginning, not to mention countless other bands before that. Someone who went from that kind of life of just playing music for fun with all sorts of groups to just nothing.
To being a monk, to asceticism, man, like pure actual asceticism.
Pretty wild.
Yeah, that's a big change.
I mean, even Mineta, after this was done, he didn't make music right away. He went on to focus on acting and other things like that. So it really was like a completely leveling kind of thing. The breakup and the album and all of that whole period was just like a raise the earth kind of thing, I think.
Yeah, it seems like a very difficult birthing process for this record, and then also just a very difficult record itself. And it seems like they released a unknowable thing, and became pretty consumed by it as well.
If I could, I liked the record listening to it today. It's not an enjoyable record in a lot of ways, but I feel like this podcast has put me in a really different mindset for listening to this band. And, it could be a little bit Stockholm syndrome, to be completely honest, but also it's a really cool statement. It's, the record starts out like a harsh Japanese noise band, and then it really kind of goes to some ethereal places, halfway through, 2/3 of the way through, all the way till the ending, until the ending gets kind of harsh again. Man, I wasn't stoned when I listened to it earlier, but I bet it would sound tight right now. So I feel like if you're in the right mindset, this record could be really cool to revisit.
It's definitely an album. It's an album that you have to come into it with a certain level of knowledge, and the more knowledge you have, the more visceral your response is going to be.
Yeah.
I think you're going to kick back harder because you're used to something else. But also, I mean, this is no possible way you could consume this record if you'd never heard the band before. You couldn't get past the first track. But because of the fact that we do know their songs and we're quite familiar with them, it makes it all that much harder almost for us to reconcile it. So this album was absolutely 100% made for people like us, people who have been with them for the long haul. They're calling back old Going Steady songs, as well as the major hits from the Ging Nang Boyz albums.
Yeah.
And it's something for the fans, absolutely, as opposed to the other album that came out at the same time, which you could consume as a new fan. And so I think that it must have been a message. There had to have been, when they came to the end of this and they heard the whole polished album, they decided to put it on vinyl and put it out. So there's a very conscious thing going on. None of it's accidental. And so I guess leaving that with us to wrestle with, I haven't come to the same conclusion you did, Bob. I still not sure that I enjoy it, but it's definitely something that was clearly made for me and people like me. And so it's something that I have to sort of, appreciate it in those terms, I guess.
I have a lot of respect for this record. I find it one that I can't compare to many other records. There's like that Lou Reed record, Metal Machine Music, that's famously difficult, and there's other famously difficult records. But I feel like the combination of being incredibly difficult and also, like you said, explicitly just for the fans is something that I don't know exists elsewhere. And I really respect it for that. I feel like it challenged me and it really made me confront some of my own thoughts about their music and music in general. And I don't necessarily want to put the record on very often, but I have a lot of respect for it. I think they've made something really unique for sure.
I'll definitely echo what Mike said. I enjoyed it, but I will probably not listen to this record for a long time again. But and yeah, getting ready for this show, I was really happy that I did.
Well, thank you for coming to the beach with me.
Yeah, nice beach party, bros.
It's been nice being on the beach with you guys today.
You guys probably didn't think we'd be talking about like Kafka and Proust, or I don't even know how to pronounce that name. But like 8 episodes ago, huh? You didn't think we'd be treading this water here, huh?
We got very deep in the literary waters here, man, talking about all kinds of Yukio Mishima and stuff too. Yeah.
This one's going on the Modernist Fiction Podcast Network, right? Well, cool. Thank you guys. This is a lot of fun. I really enjoyed being able to speak about this record with you guys because like I said, I find it really a fascinating record, and I thought this conversation was great.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, my final thoughts is that I'm going to go back and listen to this once more now with your input and see if I can enjoy it more.
Good luck.
Beach party tonight! 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 Beach party tonight!
Hey, for real, thanks for listening to Dog People. Please follow us on Instagram and Twitter at dogpeople666. I'm posting a lot of dumb shit, and who the heck am I making it for if not for you guys? Thanks to everyone who's been messaging and commenting. We got some real cool episodes coming up in the next couple weeks, so keep tuning in. Peace.